As has been previously said, the ego stores energy, thus passing from the purified pleasure ego to the definitive reality ego, which is now capable of performing a specific action. Freud described 3 stages in the evolution of the ego related to the ego-object differentiation: an initial reality ego, a pleasure ego, and a definitive reality ego. The initial reality ego is described by Freud as reality ego because it distinguishes internal and external reality according to a good objective or realistic criterion. The subject is initially capable of relating to itself the sensations of pleasure and displeasure, which constitutes an initial objective position. Pleasure and displeasure are not qualities of the external world, which in itself is indifferent. For example, if a movement like turning the head is enough to stop feeling a painful sensation in response to a source of intense light, this painful stimulus is recognized as not ego. On the contrary, if a sensation stops without any movement, it is recognized as being ego and belonging to the subject. In relation to the pleasure ego, an object which is the source of pleasure is not so easily accepted as belonging to the external world. It may come to be considered as being the ego or a part of it. In addition, anything that produces displeasure or is neutral tends to be considered as belonging to the outside world. In this way, the subject coincides with everything pleasant and the outside world with everything unpleasant. This distribution is made by means of introjection of the objects of the outside world that is a source of pleasure, and a projection to the outside of what inside is an occasion for displeasure. The purified pleasure ego is thus constituted and rules during the period of primary narcissism. The definitive reality ego is capable of performing a specific action in accordance with the reality principle. In this way, the primary process and the governing path with its hallucinatory end are relegated to the dreamlike register. Being the object leaves no room to feel its absence or any wish for it. When some control over the muscular apparatus is gained, and certain levels of specific action are possible, the source of pleasure is gradually accepted as not being the ego. The object begins to be recognized as separated from the ego, and the anxieties of losing it arise. Chronologically, the occurrence of the organic repression takes place in different moments after the specific action, in accordance with the reality principle. Also, in this case, its mechanism consists of inhibiting the cathexis of certain mnemic traces by over-cathecting others through anti-cathexis. In this way, it initiates the dynamic repressed unconscious. The aim of the anti-cathexis is always to keep the repression of intolerable drives as constant as possible. However, its elements can be of different natures, such as a reactive formation, which is an element that is directly opposed to that representation. For example, a mother having exaggerated solicitude for her children, which hides aggressive desires, or an eagerness to cleanse with an intention to fight against anal tendencies. In this case, anti-cathexis can not only be a representation, but also a behavior, a character trait, etc. From a dynamic point of view, These anticathexis consist of the cathexis of pre-conscious representations that function as an alternative to the repressed representations. They act as decoys, diverting the attention of the consciousness from the repressed representation so that the unacceptable representation can remain repressed. The most illustrative example is the well-known barriers that manage to keep pregenital child sexuality at bay, such as those that are erected against cannibalism, anality, sadism, exhibitionism, etc. In these cases, the anticathexis facilitate the consequent appearance of reactive formations, such as disgust, shame, and morality. The interest of the concept of anticathexis goes beyond the topographic, economic, and dynamic aspects. To the extent that it guarantees that one representation will replace another. It also sets the basis of the establishment of the metaphorical functioning of the mind, and therefore of symbolism. This is also true of language, since the preconscious representations that often function as anticathexis are word presentations, which replace the unconscious thing presentations. So, insofar as the organic primal repressions have been correctly installed, a new way of experiencing the world, which is mediated by language and symbolism, is established. Freud clearly distinguishes two elements in the psychic representative of a drive: an ideational representative and a quota of psychic energy. The former is the image or idea linked to a drive. The latter is the quantitative factor of a drive, that is, the specific effect that can be experienced in the consciousness as joy, sadness, anger, etc. However, since these effects can only be felt in the preconscious, conscious system of the ego, in the unconscious system there are no effects, only rudiments of them. Through the mechanism of the primal repression, a fixation is established. Namely, the ideational representative of a drive is denied the access to the consciousness, and it remains in the unconscious system together with the quota of psychic energy.